Hi, I'm Claire Tompkins, the Clutter Coach, and this is the Organize Your Life podcast. I am passionate about organizing because it makes my clients' lives so much easier, more relaxed, and with more time to spend the way they want to. In every podcast in the show, I'll lay out a simple organizing concept, and I'll tell you why it's important. I'll also include an action step at the end so you can start practicing right away. My specialty is chunking down this big topic so it's not overwhelming. That's the concept for this podcast, which is based on my first book, 52 Simple Ways to Get Organized. The book is available on my website and on Amazon. I work with clients in person in the Berkeley, California area and via email and Skype, so you don't have to be local to me. Visit the Hire tab on my website or email me at claire@cluttercoach.net. If you like the show, please rate it and review it. To do that, go to my website, cluttercoach.net, and scroll down for the show notes. Each show notes post has a link to leave a review in iTunes. I would so appreciate that. Okay, on to the podcast. This is podcast number 62, The Big Declutter, Part 1. Today's podcast is another request, this time from my sister, who's a teacher and an artist and is planning to tackle decluttering her studio this summer. Like many people, especially teachers and artists, she collects things that might come in handy sometime, and she has a lot of projects that require their own tools and materials, and she has artwork itself that continues to multiply. She doesn't want to spread out too much during this declutter project so that the rest of the house isn't affected and she can still invite guests over, so that's part of the challenge. The first step is to skim the junk off the top. The first pass to making any declutter or organizing activity is to look for what you can get rid of. This is stuff lying out on top, the low-hanging fruit. It's the stuff that you know the moment you see it that you don't need it anymore. As I've mentioned before, decluttering requires decision-making, and decision-making gets tiring. So whenever you can get rid of something without having to think about it, do it. So the skim the stuff off the top thing is the stuff that's just really easy. So start with the easy stuff. The other type of thing that you can skim off is items that belong elsewhere. Anything you don't anticipate putting away in the room belongs elsewhere, so that means not just things that really go in the kitchen, but things that belong to other people or that need to be fixed. Gather up those things and stage them somewhere where you can get them to where they need to go. Taking on a big project like this is overwhelming, so again, do the easy stuff first. That is not cheating. It gives you a taste of success up front, and that can motivate you to keep at it. Okay, next step. Back in podcast 57, I talked about developing your vision. You need some kind of vision of how you'll use the space you're decluttering, or you'll have extra trouble making decisions. My sister uses her studio for her own artwork and to develop ideas for her students. She has a clear idea of what materials make sense to go together and what supplies she needs handy. That's important to know for organizing the space. But we're doing the decluttering now, which precedes organizing. And that means we'll focus on seeing what's there, sorting it, and purging it before we figure out where to put it. Now it's time to gather containers. That will help you in your sorting. They can be cardboard boxes, plastic bins, or even just piles on the floor. If your space is crowded, you need to somehow make room for these containers, even if it means making bigger piles. The sorting is the thing. Sorting is collecting items into logical categories. All the paintbrushes, all the pencils, all the canvases. I talked about this in the previous podcast about general organizing principles. Start with broad categories and subdivide when it makes sense. The big question I get about this type of project is, where do I start? In this case, when there isn't a time crunch and space doesn't have to be created quickly to work in, start on the left. Tackle the shelf or cabinet immediately to the left of the door and just keep moving until you get to the door again. I read about this technique years ago in one of Sandra Felton's delightful Messies books. She is a self-described Messie who has made a career of helping other Messies finally get organized, and she wrote quite a few books. I recommend them. In one book, she describes learning how the staff cleaned the historic Monticello house. They entered the rooms one by one and cleaned from the left, going around and then back to the door again. At the beginning of each workday, they'd start wherever they left off and just keep going to the left. It sounds simple, but this method is great because 1, you don't need to figure out where to start, you just get to it. 2, you don't overlook anything. And 3, you focus on what's in front of you instead of being overwhelmed by the entire project. Not overlooking anything is important. As I've mentioned before, much of clutter comes from delayed decision-making. That happens when you pick something up and you aren't sure what to do with it, so you put it down again and you move on. Don't do that. Let one of your containers be labeled, I don't know. Don't force yourself to make a decision, but don't overlook the item either. Let it temporarily rest in the I don't know box. Okay, next week we'll continue this project. Till then, your action step is to do that off-the-top skimming. Get rid of the no-brainers. Put things away in other places that don't belong in the room you're decluttering. Hey, thanks for listening. I'm Claire Tompkins, the Clutter Coach. If you like the show, I'd love it if you leave a rating and review in iTunes. You can subscribe, too, so the podcast will be ready and waiting for you to listen to. You'll find the show notes on my blog at www.cluttercoach.net, and you can check out my store to find books I've written and a whole bunch of other stuff. If you're a fan of the show, you can become a patron on patreon.com for as little as $1 a month. You can find my page by going to the Patreon website, that's Patreon, and searching on Clutter Coach. I'll still post the podcast free of charge, but I've got some cool rewards for folks who want to help me make the show even better. Come back next week for a new podcast.